from Kansas State University, this is Agriculture Today. Eric Atkinson here. Coming up today, K-State's Herschel George on restoring dry farm ponds as a water source for livestock, and he'll discuss the option of developing alternative watering systems, which may be less expensive than renovating a pond. Also today, the 2018 Alumni Fellow for K-State's Graduate School from New Mexico State University, Rolando Flores, on what agricultural interests need to be doing to improve agricultural literacy in this country. Later, K-State's Romulo Lolato will preview K-State's in-depth wheat management school coming up in Garden City. And with his weekly commentary on rural Kansas, K-State's Gus Vander Hoeven. All that here on Agriculture Today. Agricultural producers, landowners, and creditors, you have a partner in your legal and financial needs. Kansas Agricultural Mediation Services offers reliable, trusted information and guidance. Whether you need advice for ag credit concerns or are transitioning your operation to the next owner, Kansas Agricultural Mediation Services can assist you in making sound decisions for your business. To learn more, call 800-321-3276 or visit us online. You're tuned in to the K-State Radio Network. Good to have you aboard once more for Agriculture Today. Yet another angle on our dry weather that we continue to endure in most of Kansas. And for livestock producers, this is becoming a more worrisome situation yet, as surface water supplies have dried up or are in the process of doing so, and thinking ahead to the watering needs of livestock as we get into the warmer days of the calendar year very soon now. What to do about dry farm ponds, and in addition to that, what one might consider as alternative water sources. Talking with us now is Herschel George. He's a research and extension watershed specialist for K-State. And Herschel has conducted quite a few demonstrations and visited with countless producers about water resources they might take a look at. Herschel, you've heard from producers, and they've been expressing a lot of concern over where their water supplies are at currently.
Yeah, it's a real issue. Here in eastern Kansas, our ponds are still relatively full. Mm-hmm. But as I talk to anyone into the Flint Hills, in the Topeka area, and anywhere further west than there, it's just a disaster situation waiting to happen.
Let's first talk about those ponds which are dried out. And the temptation for one right now would be to renovate those ponds, clean them out, and restore them. Your thinking on that, is that a viable alternative?
In a lot of cases, it is maybe the only alternative. Ideally, you'd say, well, let's just build a new pond instead of cleaning that one out. However, in most of the cases, the best sites for the pond were already taken with the first pond. So where are you going to put the second one? A lot of contractors are cleaning ponds, and Eric, it's interesting the way they're cleaning ponds today. Used to they would take a bulldozer and they would break through the dam, and then they would come back a year or so later to clean it out when all that mud got somewhat settled so it would push. Today, they're using excavators to do that. They first will drain the water out of the pond, and then they will have a bulldozer push the muck and slop to them, and the excavator will then dip the mud over the backside of the pond. And one of the reasons they go ahead and they cut the pond dam to drain the water off the top is because most of them are going to go ahead and put in a livestock water line in that pond to provide a tank below for the cattle so they can fence that pond and keep it from ever having to clean it out again.
And if one is renovating their pond, that would be a preferred consideration, that is, establishing a watering site downstream from the pond?
That's what I recommend in as many cases as possible. If you have adequate fall below that pond, slope so that the water has some gravity flow And typically I talk about 6 foot as being kind of where I like to be with those 6 foot of difference between where the full water level in the pond is and where the tank is. Typically works very well.
Any way one goes, this will be something of an expensive proposition, that is, restoring that farm pond. There's hardly a way around that, is there?
Not much. I was just doing a little scratching here a bit ago. If a producer here in eastern Kansas was cleaning the pond out with that excavator process, he's going to be using, the contractor will have 2 pieces of equipment out there. They're going to have a bulldozer and they're going to have a excavator. Let's say that he's charging $120 to $150 per piece of equipment. That's $300 an hour. If it takes 20 hours to clean that pond, he's got $6,000 in that already. I mean, it just adds up so quickly. And then that he doesn't have a pipeline in it yet and things of that nature. He's got to rebuild the dam and put it back up in shape. Probably the next story happens is so what am I going to do with all that muck that I push out of the pond? You dip it out and you put it on the backside of the pond dam, but it doesn't stay there. That stuff is semi-fluid, and it will move. It may be a little bit thicker than pancake batter is about all it is. It will flow for 100 feet or more, just working down the grade. I often encourage producers to go ahead and get that water line from the livestock water site back up to where they cut the slot in the dam installed early, because if not, you're liable to have 2 to 3 foot of mud sitting on top of where you're going to want to build that water line.
And nobody wants to be fighting that.
Oh, that's just adding insult to injury.
Right. All of this may give a producer cause to think about, Herschel, alternate water sources in lieu of restoring that pond. And you have worked with a number of ideas along this line as a watershed specialist with K-State. And in fact, there is a fine publication from Kansas State University that covers the alternatives.
Well, the publication we worked on a number of years ago was Waters and Water Systems Handbook. And it has pictures of some of these different systems, everything from solar pumps to limited accesses, the small boat ramp areas that we put in, and so we can fence the remainder of the pond, wet wells that we talk about, lots of different approaches for waters. And, yeah, it is a good look through the book, a little catalog, and just get some ideas. And then you can start investigating which one of them you wish to use. There's getting more and more solar water being used. Here in eastern Kansas, I tell people I have assisted more guys with solar systems from ponds than I have from wells, because we don't have the stock water availability through wells. I know out in central and western Kansas, solar pumps are being used more and more and more. The systems are available. They're working very well. The only problem with solar systems is sometimes we have cloudy weather, and sometimes we typically every day have limited amount of pumping time. If you do not have batteries on, your solar pump is not going to come on till 8:30 or 9 o'clock of the morning, and it will stop for you 5 or 6 in the afternoon. Mm-hmm. And so you have to be able to get your pumping times in there, and you have to have storage or something like that for overnight or evening drinking, either that or have large tanks. Some of that is described in that book, but there's lots of things that producers can look at.
Yeah. The point being that a number of these alternatives may be less expensive than cleaning out that pond.
Sure. That's exactly right. It may be even, we have a number of people that at that point will consider connecting to a public water supply like rural water or something like that is passing by their farm, and go ahead and put a connection to that and a water tank in, and using it especially during low water times or, droughthy situations, maybe using the pond as it is for a number of years when there is good water in it. But the thing I would encourage producers to do is all producers should consider putting a fence around a pond. If they once get that pond repaired, or if they have a reasonably good pond now, we should consider putting a fence around it. It does two things. One, it keeps the livestock out of it so that we're not chomping down the edges and getting that mud worked out into the middle of the pond. Number two, it's a water quality issue, and you can actually get better quality water for your livestock if you'll put a tank below it.
The direction we're headed, Herschel, it would behoove a producer to be creative about what they can do to enhance those water supplies, be it renovating their pond or, moreover, be it creating an additional source that they can rely upon here in the coming months. There are these fine extension resources from K-State. Be sure to check them out on farm pond renovation, and certainly this handbook for livestock producers and landowners, waterers and watering systems. You can find that at the K-State Research and Extension online bookstore. Go to ksre.ksu.edu, tap bookstore, type in waterers and watering systems. Timely word for the situation we're in. Herschel, we appreciate your comments and your input, and we'll talk again soon. Thank you.
Thank you, Eric.
He's Herschel George, Research and Extension Watershed Specialist for K-State. He's based in eastern Kansas and has done a load of work in the area of alternative watering systems for livestock producers.
Agriculture and food systems are the main drivers of the Kansas economy, but must be improved in order to feed the world's growing population. How are we going to do so? Reduce food loss, find ways to preserve grasslands, and help families stretch their dollars. Global food systems is one of the 5 grand challenges K-State Research and Extension is addressing. To learn more, visit www.ksre.ksu.edu.
Welcome back. You're listening to Agriculture Today. As earlier noted, the Alumni Association here at Kansas State University has been honoring several alums of the university with the Alumni Fellow Award, and we've been speaking with those with relation to agriculture this week, including our guest now. He is the Alumni Fellow for the K-State Graduate School here in 2018, and he is well acquainted with the College of Agriculture as well here at K-State, was on the faculty for quite a few years. Rolando Flores with us, and welcome back, Rolando. It's great to have you here on the campus.
It's my pleasure, Eric. I really feel very fortunate to be back and seeing the campus, seeing former acquaintances and good friends. So thank you for having the time here.
You are currently the Dean and Chief Administrative Officer in the College of Agricultural, Consumer, and Environmental Sciences at New Mexico State University. Before we speak of that and the pathway that got you to that point, where did your relationship with K-State begin, Rolando?
Yeah, well, it started when I came to do my PhD in grain science, and that was in 1986. And then I went to work as a faculty member in the Department of Biological and Agricultural Engineering. As a extension food engineer, a specialist, that's when it started. Then I have a short tenure at Iowa State University and came back to the Department of Grain Science and Industry again. And I taught and did research. So overall, I think I spent in Manhattan close to 12, 13 years. That's the time I spent with Kansas State. It was a great experience, and I can certainly say that I can bleed purple because it won't put me in trouble with my employer right now. We have the same color, so.
It works out very well that way.
Yeah, it did.
Again, as the Dean of the College of Agriculture, Consumer, and Environmental Sciences, New Mexico State.
Also very interesting, completely different geography, and in which agriculture is not number one, but is number two in terms of income for the state. But the agricultural conditions, the environmental conditions are all very, very challenging because the semi-arid areas, we still produce beef and so on. So it's a very nice place. Like I told you, we are talking about the same kind of colors. Instead of the Wildcat, we have Pistol Pete over there. So,
want to ask you a bit about what you shared in your Alumni Fellow lecture, which each of the Alumni Fellows has the opportunity to present. You talked about food processing, challenges, and great opportunities. Mm-hmm. What are the modern-day challenges that you see, and what are these opportunities as well?
One of the major problems that we are having, and I'm including agriculture in general, because food processing is part of the agricultural chain. Mm-hmm. When we look at agriculture from the farm to the table, that's the chain, the marketing chain that we have. I think over the years, we laid our guard down in terms of explaining to the consumer the wonderful and unique and safe food system that we have in this country. When you go to a point in which 1.8 to 2% of the population only works in agriculture and feeds the rest, well, we are dealing with a very efficient system. But at the same time, it's very easy to do not understand where the food comes from. And I remember about 20 years ago, people used to say, well, you go to New York and you stop someone in the streets and you ask them, where's the milk coming from? And they tell you, it comes from the grocery store. Well, I'm challenging you now that you go to many small towns and you ask to the kids, high school kids, that question, and they will tell you the same thing. Right. So what we have been losing ground is in understanding of agriculture, in understanding that there is a group of people, 1.8 to 2% in the nation, that works in agriculture, that depends on agriculture, that depends on the water use in agriculture. When we are competing for water, urban versus rural, we are having friction there. Mm-hmm. When we are competing for water with other industries, with oil and gas, we are having friction there. Agriculture, the fact that we are at that level is because we have been extremely efficient. This system in the U.S. is the best in the world, and it was developed by the land-grant system. So we're still wondering how come we see a lot of individuals challenging us in the sense of saying, our food is not safe, our food is going to kill us, our food has a lot of chemicals, our food is heavily processed, where processed food is bad, only organics are good, etc. So let me talk a little bit about these items because this is very critical, and that's what I have been devoting a lot of my time right now because, for example, in New Mexico, as it is in Kansas, we have a lot of the voters in urban areas. The number of voters in the rural areas is reducing. That means the legislators are going to go one direction or another one. So we need to really do a lot of work in agricultural literacy. And that's what I think is the key area that we are working. For example, the area of GMOs, well, we won't be able to produce the amount of food that we have if it is not because we have worked with GMOs. Traditional methods are as risky as GMOs. And then you compound that when you see that the foods that we have, that we're still eating a lot of starches and carbohydrates, which is energy. We needed that when we were those amounts of those levels when we were in the field, working in the fields and doing a lot of exercise. But now the exercise is in front of the computer, the TV, changing channels, or working in the computer the whole day. So then drastically, in a very short period of time, we have changed our lifestyles. We haven't changed our food component consumption. So then we have lifestyle diseases like diabetes, obesity, and so on. And then you see people, groups that in some way out of good faith too, I'm not saying that they do it out of bad faith, some of them will do it, attack us, and in some cases with reason, some other cases without reason. So in my view, in a place like in the U.S. where we have such a diversity of foods, if you don't want to eat GMOs, don't buy GMOs. If you want to eat organics, buy organics. You pay more, but you go ahead and eat it. Do that. but don't obstruct the use or consumption of those technologies, because there is a lot of people that we need to feed in the world. And the economy of states like Kansas, Nebraska, even in New Mexico, which is the second agriculture, heavily depends on the global market, the trade market, and we have to be competitive. And those technologies. So right now, what I feel is we not only have to work extremely hard to develop more technologies so that we can produce the food that is going to be needed for the global population, but also we need to be able to participate in the markets. So that's what I was addressing, some of the issues. So those are some of the challenges that we need to go and overcome.
I have to ask you one quick question, although we could talk about this subject ad nauseum here. How does the land grant system, or other agricultural interests for that matter, improve agricultural literacy, reach to the public? Do you have any thoughts on tactics or approaches that might help head down that path?
Well, Eric, you know that if we will have this conversation 10 years ago, we can say use the radio, use the TV, flyers. But right now, we can use that too, but we need to use digital media. We need to access the individuals that go there. We need to be relentless. We need to be more proactive. We need to figure out ways.
The story has to be taken to the people.
Exactly. And we need to develop new ways to take the story. If I will have all the answers, probably you and I won't be here. But I think one of the biggest advantages that we have in a land-grant university, in a land-grant system, is that we have people connected with people. As we found out ways to have higher yields in the fields, in the agricultural products, we need to find out more effective ways to communicate. The livelihood of the land-grant system is depending on how effective we're going to be in developing communication systems. And that is the biggest challenge. The other big challenge that we have is we need to make sure that the stakeholders see value in what we're doing.
Congratulations on the recognition. It's great to have you back on the K-State campus, and safe travels back to Las Cruces. Rolando, thank you.
Thank you very much, Eric. Pleasure to be here.
He is currently the Dean and Chief Administrative Officer of the College of Agricultural, Consumer, and Environmental Sciences, New Mexico State University. He spent a dozen years or thereabouts on the faculty at Kansas State University in the Grain Science and Industry Department, as well as the Biological and Agricultural Engineering Department, and a 1989 graduate from the Graduate School with his doctorate in grain science. Dr. Rolando Flores has been with us as the Graduate School Alumni Fellow 2018. You're listening to Agriculture Today. For 25 years, K-State Research and Extension's Kansas Agricultural Mediation Services has been providing a no-cost, confidential place to call in and visit with an agricultural lawyer. Our experts are available to help you producers handle legal and financial issues. Explore your options and generate solutions. Call us at 800-321-3276 or visit us online. Kansas Agricultural Mediation Services. This is Agriculture Today. Stop, look, and listen. This is our state, Kansas.
I noticed a big tree pulled out and cut in half. I hadn't done that.
That's Gus Vanderhoeven of Kansas State University with comment on life in rural Kansas.
Sometimes things happen at the farm, and I wonder who did that. Of course, we're all familiar with trespassing hunters. If you see them, you walk up to them and kindly tell them, "No hunting on this place." And when they answer, "Oh, I'm sorry, I thought or did not know," etc., etc., it seems that most trespassing hunters can't read. I've signs, but I've never painted posts purple. Then there are the times you come across a cut fence line. Annoying. But that is why we walk the fences before cows are put back in. Last year a doe got hung up in the fence. When we put the fence up, I placed the top wire further from the lower wire to prevent that. But this one did get trapped. I felt bad. Hanging on the wire fence and struggling is a bad way to go. A clean bullet or a well-directed arrow is to be preferred. I found whole bleached skeletons laying in the shade of a bush. The antlers still attached, so it must have been fall or early winter when it died. Could be age, or a bad shot, or a running shot. The buck got away and died later. Other things happen with uncontrolled burns. We started patch burning, and once you follow that pattern of burning only 1/3 of your ranch and burning the whole ranch over 3 years, it is clear that an uncontrolled burn by a neighbor can interfere with the best-made plans. It happens sometimes at night when a fire rekindles. Mostly the wind will die down, but sometimes a fire rekindles with a cow patty burning, and it can follow a fence line. Surprise when you look the next day. It's one reason I often stayed well into the night to keep an eye on a fire we had set. And once the cows are back and saddled, they are on your mind. All it takes is a heavy branch falling on the fence line or a tree tipping over. The fence-walking cows walk to the tree, and what now? They push from the back, and sometimes they hop the fence as the wires are held down by the weight or the branch or tree. I have met them coming to me on the road. Oh, I loved their eyes with the expression of schoolboys playing hooky. The funny thing is, they knew what they had done. The leaders turned around and trotted back across the plowed field towards the broken fence and neatly stepped back, lifting their tails as if to say, "Sorry, you caught us." Our land is hard to oversee. It's not a simple square pasture. The range is hilly, with draws and ridges, and I love it. But it takes more to keep an eye on livestock. I miss the dogs, which were a great help. The terrain beyond the range is easy to hide in, with the creeks and the trees. Walking along the outer edge of one of the larger hay meadows, I noticed a big tree pulled out and cut in half. And I had not done that. I asked some friends who burn firewood and have permission to clear fallen timber. The tree was laying near a crossing from one field to another, both hay meadows. I made a mental note to come back and clear the tree and cut it up. And so I did a few days ago. It was a tall, dead tree, very hollow, a locust, and that is good firewood. I started cutting the big branches and then cut the trunk in chunks I could handle. They will need splitting. That too has become a job. But it is worth it. Nothing like a good fire on a cold evening. I have to get rid of these trunks as they are laying on the hayfield. One of them I will push back among the trees along the edge of the meadow so I can sit on it in the shade. There's a nice view from there across the hayfield to the hills further behind. The other half of the tall locust had a surprise for me. I told you it was hollow, but it wasn't empty. It had a bee's nest in it with combs of honey. A bear would have loved it. And I wondered if that was the reason someone had pushed the dead tree over and cut it in half to get at the honey or the bees. I have to go back and finish the job, and when I do that, I'll take a closer look. There were no active bees around as I cut the trunk in short sections. You actually hate to do this and interfere with the bees. When John, my road grader friend was clearing overhanging trees along the county road, he ran into a bee's nest in one of those trees. In that one, the bees were active and quite upset with the roaring chainsaw and the heavy equipment. The dozer picked the cut trunk up and moved it with bees and all to an out-of-the-way spot. I must go and look to see how that bee's nest is faring. Even on the 4 acres of our home here close to town, I noticed there are now 4 turkey vultures floating over the old barn. I expect the mated pair to settle down and start laying an egg. Maybe there will be 2 eggs again. Don't laugh. I brought a few forkfuls of dried leaves and placed them in the corner where they laid the eggs last year. We shall see. We're halfway through April, and I expect an egg soon. This is the time that they lay. Then the 35 to 45 days of hatching and raising their young comes later. It's a job, but I love to watch them floating, circling. They belong and are welcome, even if they stink. They were here long before I brought my family to Kansas.
Gus Vander Hoeven of Kansas State University with his weekly commentary on rural Kansas. Our time's away for today. Thanks for tuning in. Eric Atkinson here for Agriculture Today. This is the K-State Radio Network.